Our Big Ten season recap is going to include just kind of a breakdown of the standings. Was it what we expected? Some takes, some makes, some misses that we had back in the summer. If you were a listener all the way from back in the summer, you remember some of them. And boy, were we right about some of them. And boy, we were wrong about some of them. But that's just what always happens. And I just love looking back at stuff like that and seeing like how we did, what was our feel, what was our vibe. Definitely going to be talking about awards as well because we gave our predictions for awards and of course our over under takes as well. What do we take? What do we not take? What were we scared to take? Maybe some regrets. Maybe some regrets. So I guess how do we want to start this? Let's talk about now that we're on the coaches. I guess let's just talk about coaches that got fired.
Okay.
Let's talk about coaches that got fired and that are going to get replaced this next year. Mel Tucker out the door. Pat Fitzgerald out the door. Tom Allen out the door. Tom Allen was the only one that was fired at the end of the season for actual performance, whereas the other two were fired for different reasons. And we just talked about Jim Harbaugh, so we don't need to get into that as much. But I don't know. I think all those we've talked about all those hires. Those are pretty good hires. Did you think that it was the right time to fire Tom Allen in that situation? Do you think uh, that Michigan State is better off without Mel Tucker? And let's erase the whole scandal right from
Yeah.
Pat Fitzgerald and Mel Tucker. Let's erase those. Do we think those programs are actually in better spots now, despite facing some adversity, than they were just 6 months ago?
Here's the deal. I do think that we'll start with Northwestern and Pat Fitzgerald. Obviously the interim job went to David Braun, I believe, and he ended up having a ton of success, outperforming our preseason expectations and everybody's preseason expectations. Made a bowl game, actually won one against a pretty good Utah team. And obviously he kept the title of head coach, was promoted to just full-time acting head coach. Congrats to him and his family and the Northwestern program. I don't know about better off than Pat Fitzgerald. I do think, obviously, everything off the field aside, right? We're talking about strictly on the field performance the next couple years. Pat Fitzgerald did things at Northwestern that you just don't do at Northwestern. Like, there's a reason why Vanderbilt just is continuously stinks in the SEC and in Northwestern. Pat Fitzgerald had that program, first of all, having multiple first round draft picks, elite NFL talent heading off the door, did a great job of scouting, evaluating, and keeping these guys, developing them into players that they were, and also like doing it the right way where, hey, president, hey, AD, my boss is at Northwestern. Give me time. Okay. Like every year, we're not going to make a bowl game. Every year, we're not going to compete in a bad Big Ten West. But he did it the right way where he built up to certain seasons and went all in and cashed in those seasons. And they made it to the Big Ten championships. They went to high bowl games and had a lot of success in those seasons. And he capitalized it and he made a payday. And obviously, David Braun looks to continue to do that in a similar way. But obviously, it's a totally different landscape, right? With the new Big Ten and all that goes on there. And they just keep moving down the rungs of the ladder in the Big Ten, which is tougher now than has ever been for David Braun in Northwestern. We'll see. I mean, I had zero expectations for them this year. We were completely wrong about them.
None.
We had zero with no talent. We thought they had no talent on either side of the ball, and we're really going to struggle, especially with the coaching change and all that happened there, and their schedule and whatnot, and they completely played. They were second in the Big Ten West, right? They won 8 games. They won 8 games. That was incredible. What they won more games than Wisconsin. Obviously outperformed everyone else in the Big Ten West, and they did their thing. So yeah, I don't know. With Northwestern, I I don't know if it's gonna get much better than this, right? But it also could. Like every time I doubt Northwestern, I feel like they they play pretty damn well. So that's what I'll leave it at.
Yeah, I'll tell you on the show, I was very explicit about this team. It would be a miracle to make a bowl game. I said, quote, they're not that good. I was worried about them losing a lot of talent from last year. I mean, they lost five guys to the NFL last year, and they won one game with that team. One game with a team of five NFL players. Absurd, right? Absurd. So I just kept looking at it, and I'm like, okay, now you have this Pat Fitzgerald thing. So now their leader, right? Who players are transferring, players are upset. Oh my gosh, now the baseball coach is fired. Is this athletic department just an absolute mess? Yeah, it was until David Braun righted the ship. So he absolutely slam dunked on both of us. I know the under wasn't a play for you, but it was for me. And the under was three. It was 3 wins. Northwestern had 8 wins. They had 5 wins in conference. In conference, they had 5 wins. That is absurd. That is absurd. So congrats Northwestern for making me look like an idiot. But I don't think did anyone expect this? Come on, let's be real here.
No,
If
I
you're
don't know
if
if
you're a
David Braun
Northwestern
did.
fan, in the comments, I want you to give me a reason why you believe the Northwestern from the beginning. Why did you believe in Northwestern? Why did you have this faith that they were going to make a bowl game? Because I would love to hear it because I just could not see it until it happened. And Ben Bryant, here's what I'll say. We might talk some, NFL draft stuff in the next couple months here. We'll figure out how we want to organize that content. But I've said this, and this might be the hottest take that I've ever had with like NFL draft stuff. But Ben Bryant won't get drafted, and that's fine. But some team should give him a shot to be a backup quarterback. That dude wins like wherever he goes. Cincinnati, Eastern Michigan, Cincinnati again, Northwestern. It does not matter what kind of talent surrounds him. He found ways to win ball games. Game manager style, right? Game
The,
manager style.
he brings some legit value, not in terms of like franchise upside, but also like as a backup, like you mentioned, like a guy that has high
Just a
IQ,
backup.
a good enough arm, very accurate throw of the football, and then also has been in a ton of systems and knows everything there is to know about the quarterback position in college football. Obviously, he still has stuff to learn for sure. Every quarterback does, but also like there's some value there. I don't hate that take at all. I do think you see guys like Brock Purdy, you see guys, Chase
Oh, he's
Daniel.
not. Let's get that clear. He is not as good of a prospect as Brock Purdy was. And Brock Purdy was the last overall pick in the NFL draft. Ben Bryant will not be drafted in this upcoming NFL draft unless they pull a Sean Clifford like the Packers did last year, which was crazy. That was awesome. But like
I get,
just
yeah.
I mean, come on. He should be given a chance at a roster spot, is all I'm saying, on an NFL team.
Yeah, a better comp is probably another Northwestern Wildcat in Trevor Simeon, right? And obviously he's been in the NFL for a while, journeyman type of guy. So
Yeah.
yeah, credit to Northwestern. They outperformed our expectations, everyone's expectations. Yeah, and that was awesome to see. There's obviously magical stuff happens there in Evanston. It's hard to play and to win. Sometimes weird. Ryan Field is just still terrible, but they got some wins there this year, and they did their thing. Yeah, do you want to move on to one of the other coaches?
Yeah, let's talk Mel Tucker, Michigan State. Uh 4-8. The over under that we took at the beginning of the year, I believe, was 5.5. I believe we took it at 5.5. It ended up going down to 4.5. I slammed it at 5.5. Slammed the under. I believe we had someone in the comments. I don't have their name pulled up because I don't care at all. They said, please take the under. I want this person to be humbled. Awesome. Well, let me tell you, I triple united Michigan State under 5.5 and it cashed pretty easily. Now, was that partly thanks to Mel Tucker? Yeah, I think so. But I think this team also had its problems. We talked about it in the spring game. In the spring game, they didn't have a quarterback. And let's be real, Michigan State fans. Caden Hauser is not the answer. He was not the answer for the future either. It was not Noah Kim. It's not Caden Hauser, right? Now it's Aiden Childs, which is what you get. So I want to say that this program is in a better spot right now than it was back in July because I think Jonathan Smith is a better coach. I've been saying that. I've been saying I don't hate Mel Tucker as a coordinator, but Jonathan Smith is a better head coach. Aiden Childs is a better quarterback than Mel Tucker has had since actually Michigan State has had probably since Connor Cook, right?
Yeah,
It's been a few years. I mean, Connor Cook they took the team to the playoffs, right? I mean,
he's NFL quarterback. Yeah,
yeah,
Connor Cook's a
got
very good player.
spanked, got spanked by Bama in the playoffs, but he's pretty good. Yeah, I think things are looking up for Michigan State for sure. So sorry for the preseason hate this year and last year. If you ever had a conversation with me, I was not high on Michigan State either. after their explosive season. Their over under win total was at 7.5. So, whoa, whoa.
Crazy.
And while everyone's slamming the over and moving this thing up, I'm like, let me zig that zag. So yeah, what are your thoughts, I guess, on this Michigan State team moving forward? And like any thoughts in particular on this team this year? And like, did they eh, play to your expectations? Did they not meet your expectations? Like what happened here?
Yeah, it was kind of a tough year all around. They won a couple close games. They lost some games they probably shouldn't have lost. They definitely should have beaten Iowa. And yeah, that was kind of about it. I think they blew the Rutgers game, I believe, as well. So yeah, it was kind of wild up and down season. Obviously, a lot went on and off the field. They're looking for a fresh change there. I know they're glad to see a guy like Jonathan Smith, who we spoke very highly of in our video. If you want to check that out in our coaching carousel playlist of Michigan State's hire of Jonathan Smith. Interim head coach Harlan Barnett did, he did what he could. Obviously, it was not enough to keep the job there, and obviously, no one really expected him to do that because it was a tough situation he was in. Yeah, like you, for all the reasons you said, there was a ton of skepticism on his team, and to me, what's kind of been a glaring weakness for them for multiple years now under Mel Tucker is their O line, and they've continued to do not really much about it, and that's kind of been the story of their offense, where even if they had a quarterback back there, like I don't even know what he could really do, and obviously Kenneth Walker's kind of patched a lot of those holes on that offense, like we saw defense, even though that was Mel Tucker's calling card, has also been pretty bad, especially that secondaries, which his calling card in the NFL and obviously um in the SEC as well. So like it's kind of been weird. Um Past couple years there for Michigan State. I think they're ready to move on from the Mel Tucker era as the highs as high as the highs were, the lows were pretty darn bad, and obviously off the field stuff was just not good at all. We won't get into that on this show here, but yeah, Jonathan Smith, I'm sure they have to be excited about him. What we saw him turn around a pretty bad program in Oregon State at the time he took over, and obviously looks to do that in this new look Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, you had it at a push. You said you weren't going to take the over or the under there. You didn't even lean a direction either. I think in hindsight, that's probably the right thing because, who could have expected the turmoil that was going to happen, right? I mean, just there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of question marks, I think, and also their schedule was pretty tough. I think you noted that as well in the preseason, and it proved to be pretty tough for them. So finishing, I mean, 2-7 in the conference, second to last, only in front of Indiana.
Who
Jeez.
also fired their coach.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about
Hey,
Indiana.
so Tom Allen leaves. Obviously, Kirk Cignati comes over, comes up from.
Leaves,
I'm
or he
sorry,
gets
he was
relieved
walked
of
out the
his
door.
duties.
Yeah,
But for $20 million, you can walk me out any door you want.
Tom Allen's doing fine. I believe he's going over to Penn State now, right, to be the defense coordinator there to replace Manny Diaz. He'll be there for a couple of years and obviously enter his name back in the head coaching search if he does so decide to choose. But yeah, Kirkson is a guy we both really like from James Madison. They had some really nice bright spots on their roster, and he kept a couple of those guys offensively. Obviously, couldn't keep Brennan Sorsby, who's going to Cincinnati, which is a really nice get there for Scott Satterfield and in the Big 12. But yeah, it's going to be a very interesting year there in Indiana. They've kind of really committed to a football program. It sounds like this offseason they're kind of done being the bottom of the Big Ten in football, and they know how important football is to their conference and to their standing in it. And so they're going all in. And obviously, yeah, this season they brought in a ton of transfers. Tom Allen swung for the fences and missed pretty heavily. But it was a desperate attempt for him. Like he was kind of backed into a corner. We talked about him in Indiana kind of being in wounded animal mode all throughout the offseason. And they obviously took some hits on some transfers. None of them really hit that desperately. And yeah, we were kind of spot on. 3.5 was their total, and they were at 3 wins. And so that's kind of what they expected to do. And because of that, Tom Allen was left out the door.
Yeah, I will say. So if you're a lot of like, national couch fans, whatever, if you look at the the Indiana program, you're like, at the beginning of the season, you're like, oh, Tom Allen is for sure on the hot seat. And like, yeah, he was, and I think he knew it, right? But the reality is, it was a big deal for this Indiana program to buy him out like that. And that is the new Big Ten media rights deal money that was able to perform that, because otherwise, Indiana, that athletic department would in no circumstance otherwise would be able to buy out Tom Allen. They'd be stuck with him for another couple of years. But it is important that they did that, because I do think it means that, hey, we are the athletic department. We are the big men in the chairs. We do care about this football program, no matter how unsuccessful it has been in the last 30 years. Let's do something about it. So they did do something about it. We'll see if Curt Cignetti's transfers work. I mean, they didn't seem to work for Tom Allen. And look, they probably won't work year one. Oh well. Doesn't mean it isn't a good hire. So overall, I'd say Indiana, yeah, like you said, met expectations. We both had a no play. We were skeptical on the transfers, but there were so many of them. We were like, not for me. I'm not going to take that. Right. So yeah, definitely a last resort effort from Tom Allen. Didn't work out. But again, program might be headed in the right direction. Still a lot of time to be held, or a lot of time needs to pass before we can really decipher that. Curtis Rourke, though, is headed there to play quarterback. I like him a lot. We'll see how he does in the Big Ten, though. We will see how he does in the Big Ten. So that's for coaches that got fired. That's for coaches that got fired. You were bringing this up pre-show. I guess I'll let you ask the question about other coaches, that didn't get fired.
Yeah. So what's interesting is with it, we talked about like offseason and expectations and if you met them or not. There were some coaches that I thought seat were a little bit warm, or at least people that didn't get the monkey or get the ADs and their fan bases off their back, or guys that really took a step forward in 2023 to kind of give them, that cushion and like, hey, your job's secure for now. You did a great job. Let's extend you and get this ball rolling and continue the momentum, right? We talked about guys like, for whatever reason, Ryan Day was on the hot seat, and some people right after the Michigan game were very upset with him, and rightfully so, right? Like, you're a very
Falling
passionate
for
fan
his
base.
job.
That's ridiculous. That is unfair. Programs like Ohio State do not deserve to have a guy like Ryan Day. Okay, if you're very frustrated with
No.
him, you can fire him. Fire him and see where he lands immediately.
Yeah,
See how
yeah,
many people are
exactly.
knocking on his door because he's an incredible head coach. And you see, but I do think, right? Not was his seat ever hot this year by the administration, but there was some. Hey, Ryan Day, right? Michigan just won a national title. Okay, you gotta maybe let's press the envelope here, or whatever that saying goes. And we've seen it in the portal and with their NIL game, keeping people from the NFL draft, going all in for the season, bringing in a guy like Bill O'Brien to take over play calling duties. Yeah, I mean, that obviously Ryan Day is not on the hot seat, nor what should he ever have been. But I do think like some buttons were pushed, and I think it's going to turn out well for him in the program in 2024 and beyond.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about then. Now that we're on the Ohio State train, we'll get back to other coaches that might have been on the hot seat. So their preseason over-under win total was 10.5. That's a lot. You're asking a team to win 11 games to hit their over. I said, no thanks. I said, I'm not going to take that. I'll leave it at 10.5. I'm not going to touch it at all. Solely because, like, I was a Kyle McCord believer. I stated that on the preseason show, right? I knew he could potentially put up numbers. I like the weapons that were around him. But the reality is, I didn't know what I was getting from the quarterback position. And I did believe that Penn State and Michigan were really, really good this year, which, both things can be true, right? So I was right to be high on the defense this year. It was unbelievable. I was right to not believe that Zach Harrison was missing him was a big deal at all. It literally was not. Addition by subtraction, we kind of nailed that. And also Notre Dame was on their schedule, so that kind of pushed me away as well. So, what were some things that you were looking at Ohio State at the beginning of the season that maybe came to fruition or didn't come to fruition?
Yeah, like you, I pushed, right. We were both worried about that O line, and it turned out to
Yeah,
be
Josh Fryer.
good.
That was a great take, by the way. I think I mentioned my question marks I had with Josh Fryer after watching the spring game, and yeah, there are
their
certainly
tackles
question marks.
they struggled. Obviously, they tried to bring in a transfer. It didn't really work out fantastically. They had to replace CJ Stroud, which I don't think we realized how valuable he was, right? Obviously, the O line was really, really good. Obviously, the players around him were really, really good. But we see him lighting up in the NFL, winning a playoff game, doing all the good things that rookie quarterbacks aren't supposed to be doing in the NFL. And obviously, if you add CJ Stroud to a team like that, they're probably national title winners, if not very close to it. Yeah, and to me, the schedule scared me away. I didn't know exactly what Notre Dame was going to be, but I thought they'd be improved. And obviously, at home, Notre Dame was hosting Ohio State, so that definitely scared me. And then obviously Ohio State, I believe, had to go on the road to Michigan, and that obviously, it scared me as well. I was worried about Kyle McCord as well, a little bit more worried than you were. I was pushing for Devin Brown to take over that job, or more so hoping Devin Brown takes that job by the handles. But we were both behind the defense, which turned out to be right, and that was part of the reason which got Ohio State fans so excited about this team and about the potential, because the problem that's been there for Ryan Day for a couple of years now is that defense has kind of been lagging in big time moments. Physicality has been a problem, but we saw that defense this year was nasty, 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 nasty. And obviously, they're bringing a lot of those guys back for 2024. Should be a very, very fun year for Ohio State. I know a lot of fans looking forward to that. We'll see what Will Howard does. How much better is he than Kyle McCord? I don't know.
I
I
like him.
like to think so. I do too. I think he adds an element in the running game,
Ah,
which is
and
underrated. He's a
he's
big
just
dude.
better. I'm sorry. And like, oh, there are a lot of people out there that do not feel that way at all. That they really missed out on the Cam Ward sweepstakes. And Cam Ward, yeah, he's a stud. He probably could have been a better option than Will Howard, but man,
If you're good enough for Lincoln Riley, you're good enough for me. Okay, that's kind of what I
yeah.
do by
I mean,
quarterbacks. And Will Howard was committed there for a little bit, or silently committed, or whatever it was, unofficially. USC's portal quarterback, whatever it was, and the Miller Moss does his thing, and obviously USC's like, well, no, hold on a minute, we'll use those funds for something else, and yeah, I do think that's very interesting. They obviously bring in Julian Sayin, Aaron Nolan, two highly touted freshmen there, so yeah, I feel like Ohio State we were pretty close on. We kind of saw a lot of that coming. If you told me they were going to be 11-1, I'd be like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it obviously would have mattered who they lost to depend on what happened with the college football playoffs and everything else that happened in other conferences. I think this was a weird year where we saw 2 years ago, right, where Ohio State and Michigan made it, after playing each other because of everything else that happened in the other conferences, namely the Big 12 and the ACC, and also obviously the Pac-12. So yeah, I think it's all good stuff here for Ohio State. I mean, they had a good year, not great year, but obviously that's what comes with the Ohio State job. Is it's that much pressure is put on you that 11-1 is not good enough.
yeah, which is crazy. So I think we both didn't take the over there, but pretty solid analysis though. I think like we were kind of right about Ohio State this year in a lot of ways. I think we were higher on Kyle McCord than I think you ultimately ended up being, but still, pretty good analysis there. Other coaches that did not get fired, that maybe saved themselves from the hot seat or are still on the hot seat or didn't really move anywhere from the hot seat. Got some names in mind? Or
Yeah, we'll go right to bat. We'll go Rutgers and Greg Schiano, right? I was a guy that took their over. I bought a game, and I moved it down to over 3.5 at -188.
which
I
is
I
pretty criminal,
I
but
didn't need it. I didn't need it in the long run. They won 6 games in the regular season there, and obviously I just was taking the free money with that, so that was kind of crazy. But in terms of what we were looking for was Kirk Straka coming over. That's what scared you away from that is you watched the spring game, and obviously you saw him on 3rd and long check it down multiple times and run like little hitch routes. Yep.
can I just say though, I also nailed the Gavin Wimsatt stinks at quarterback take. I think I nailed that as well, right? And I nailed the Kurt Schrock stinks as well. They ran the ball down bad Big Ten teams' throats. Is that not what happened? And they played great defense.
Yeah.
Aaron Lewis is a good player. They got a good defensive coordinator as well, Razmiak, right?
Yep.
Did he get an extension there, or did he
Yep.
get a job? Like, yeah, he got an extension there.
Minnesota came knocking for him, and he got a nice little extension. Good for him.
Yeah, good for him. And so I look, this is a great season for Rutgers. Great season. So I think so. You think he's officially out of the dumps right now, out of the hot seat, or do you think he still
Now,
needs to kind of continue this success?
well, obviously in the Big Ten, in the new Big Ten, it's going to be very cutthroat. I have no doubt about saying that. But I also think that this is important. A nice little step for him. I believe this is what, year four? Shiano's been there for 4 years. Wow, that's crazy. And he has not made a bowl game yet. Technically in 2021 he made one, but that was because the APR record and also with everything going on, not a ton of eligible teams, and they lost the Gator Bowl back in 2021. But yeah, so he hasn't been to a bowl game. Rutgers himself hasn't been a bowl game since Kyle Flood all the way back in 2014. So that it was really nice to see 9 years later getting to a bowl game, beating a team like Miami pretty soundly. So yeah, I think this did wonders for Rutgers and Greg Schiano moving forward. And obviously, I'm gonna keep saying it, but in the new Big Ten, like things gonna change, and I hate to keep saying it, but I want to emphasize it because and remind people that hey, like this is gonna be a totally different year of college football. Expectations, reality, all that good stuff is gonna kind of totally shifted and shaped in the next, 6, 7 months until we have college football again. So yeah, I think this is pretty darn good. And good analysis by me. Credit to me. I'm just kidding. I kind of won for the wrong reasons. I was hoping Kirk Soraka would take a step forward there. I've and I was also hoping that Gavin Winsap would take a step forward to get healthy. And obviously neither of those things happened. They still ran the ball super well, played good defense. And to be honest, like in the Big Ten, if the schedule falls right, like that's all you need to do to make a bowl game. And we've seen Minnesota and Iowa and Illinois and teams like that feast on that for years now. And obviously things are going to change. I like I'll say that again. Things are going to
Yeah,
change, but or maybe they won't. Maybe the new Pac-12 newcomers will have to, bend and shift to the Big Ten way, the Big Ten West, as we like to refer to it.
I don't know, man. I don't know. I Great season. I think we kind of nailed it on the predict. I mean, I didn't take the over, but I saw the good defense that was there potentially, a really good defense it ended up being, and I guess Gavin Wimsatt kind of stinking. But look, how do you feel about Ethan Kaliak-Manis going in there next year?
Gavin Wimsatt 2.0. I mean, at
Not
least Kirk
even.
Soraka's his
How
guy.
about not even?
Okay, let's be real about Ethan, his mechanics he was super inconsistent and yeah, he was bad. I'm kind of done defending him, but also like there's some upside there. You've seen it in certain games. So we'll see if Soraka, who recruited him out of high school, can see if he can maximize his talents at least a little bit, right? I don't know. I like it for Ethan. I don't know if I love it for Rutgers, but also like how attractive is that quarterback position there, anyways? Who do you have at receiver, right? You lost a lot of guys the year before, and you didn't really replace them with a ton of guys. You brought in some transfers, guys that have never really played at the FBS level, and they didn't really hit like you wanted them to. And so we'll see where they go from here. But yeah, I don't know how much different I feel about Rutgers, but I do think maybe eventually they're going to just keep getting better and better. And I think hovering around 6, 7 wins would be super successful for Greg Schiano and Rutgers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you have another coach in mind that you want to talk about that maybe played themselves out of the hot seat, or didn't, or is right still in the same spot?
I don't know. I do think one guy I will bring up just because we do get it a lot and it is kind of a big deal in college football is the whole James Franklin debate. Like, is Penn State tired of James Franklin? And I'll tell you this, the administration wise and the guys that cash the checks and that get the money there, they love him. He brings in a lot of revenue for them. He wins a lot of football games. Now, can he beat Ohio State and Michigan consistently? He has not. Doesn't mean he can't eventually. I do think that with Michigan leaving and a lot of stuff happening and shifting in the Big Ten, I do think Penn State's right there next to everybody else and with the talent and resources that they do have to be able to compete. And I think that's the frustrating part for Penn State fans is that they believe that they're right there and they believe they're a tier one team in the Big Ten, but yet they continue to fall short of expectations. So I guess not really expectations. Did they hit their over? Which, by the way, we both cashed, and that was a mega play for both of us. Felt really good about it. Um,
Super
and
play.
and
When we're
obviously we
both
were
on something, it's a super play.
yeah, and yeah, and I mine was I believe I said mega play lock. So it was just like I felt really good about it. They won 10 games. They beat every team they were supposed to beat, and then they lost to the teams they weren't supposed to beat. And that's just about the most James Franklin season you can have. Is that enough to get him off the hot seat? Or if you're a Penn State fan, right, are you frustrated with him? Do you think they are? Do you think they should be?
Yeah, I mean, no, they shouldn't. I don't know. I think as a fan, it's okay to be frustrated, like to want more. Like you should, as a fan, always like you should want more, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the expectation should be like as a fan, yeah, it's I can understand being upset and not being able to beat Ohio State, not being able to beat Michigan. When you're recruiting at a similar level as Michigan, it's not better. And I mean, right? I mean, I don't know. You're our recruiting guy, but you're definitely not recruiting at the same level as Ohio State, right?
No.
But I don't know. You've had all these hopes. You've brought in the 5-star quarterbacks before, and they still just can't win those ball games. Just I don't know. I will say though, our analysis before the season, right? We both said that the offensive line was going to be really good, and there were pieces of it that were good, right? Not as a unit, I think it underwhelmed greatly, and so did that running back room, specifically Nick Singleton. Katron Allen, I thought was better than Nick Singleton this year. I don't know
Yeah.
what your thoughts on that are, but Katron Allen was better. All right. We talked about before the season loving the defense. Boy, did that age like just fine wine. We said it could be one of the best defenses in the country, and it was, if not the best, behind Michigan. I believe specifically, if I'm looking at these notes right here, I said that the secondary was very good, but I was worried about the size against Ohio State, which do you remember talking about? That ended up aging like fine wine as well. So I don't know, some pretty decent takes. I mean, I was a lot of people were high on Drew Aller. I was high on him for sure, but I had my questions about him, and I think some of those were answered. But now you got an offensive coordinator that can work with just about anyone. You got an offensive coordinator that won ball games with freaking Cole Ballard walk on for true freshman quarterback Cole Ballard. Actually, I don't know if they won that game. They played Tech. They might have lost that game. But anyways, still getting stuff done. That's the point. That's what Andy K does. You get stuff done. So I like the spot that Penn State's in. I think you should keep James Franklin. He's got a great coaching staff in there going right now. He's producing NFL talent. I don't know. The wins might come eventually, and with the 12-team playoff, like you're gonna have your chance as Penn State. You're gonna have your chance to get in and compete for the college football playoffs, even if you're not winning the Big Ten championship. So I say hold off. Let James Franklin cook. All right, let him cook. Let him cook.
Yeah, I do think this was obviously a little bit disappointing year because I think you just expected a little bit more out of Drew Lohr. He was a guy that was a top 5, top 3 guy nationally, not only at his position, but nationally, coming out of high school from Medina, Ohio. And obviously that 2022 class that they brought in, who was sophomores this year, will be juniors this upcoming season in 2024, right? That was ranked 6th nationally. You mentioned that they're not quite recruiting at Ohio State's level. Maybe that's not quite up to top 3 like Ohio State has been. 6 is damn good. And this has been a class they've been building up to the last couple of years. They feel really good about it. You've seen them kind of go and make some moves in the portal, which we do like. Bringing in a guy like AJ Harris, who we talked about, Jalen Kimber, another DB from the SEC, a couple linemen from Wisconsin, obviously Julian Fleming, the former 5-star from Ohio State. And they believe that they can make some moves here, tweak it there, here and there, and really compete in the Big Ten. Yeah, I felt our analysis was pretty good. I was a little bit higher on Drew Lohr and obviously Dante Cephas, which did not hit at all. And even the O line and running backs. I mean, yeah, Kay Allen was pretty good at times. Nick Singleton, was not as productive as he was as a freshman. And that O line was supposed to be just dominant. And in big time games, they didn't really get it done. Wasn't on the offensive coordinator, was on the scheme, was on Drew Lohr, setting protection, not getting the ball out right away. Who knows? Could be a lot of different things. Regardless, though, we kind of it was a pretty good read on our end, and they kind of turned out how it was. I don't think you should be worried about James Franklin long term. I think he can win there and win big. Just because he hasn't doesn't mean he won't. But yeah, I think we kind of hit the head on the nail or the nail on the head there with Penn State.
Absolutely. What about what about Mike Locksley? Was he really on the hot seat? Or
No,
was it like I no, he wasn't on the hot seat. Was his seat really warm? Like
no,
legitimately.
I don't think so. I do think, back to back 8-win years, and obviously 7 wins the year prior. It
That's a
started off
lot in the Big Ten, by the way.
for Maryland. Okay,
That is a lot.
yeah. Yeah, I do think that's pretty darn good for Mike Locksley there. Obviously, they lost a ton of talent, right, on both sides of the ball, wide receiver room, defensive backs, all that good stuff. He's developed pretty darn well. So credit to them, credit to them getting it done. So yeah, they obviously they started off super, super hot and they kind of struggled, limped to the finish line. We saw that happen though. That happens quite almost every year for Maryland, or at least the past couple years. So no surprise there. When you get into the real meats and potatoes of that schedule, right, in the Big Ten, you're going to take some losses. The durability isn't quite there yet in this program. I think another year of recruiting okay is going to do it. Hopefully, fill some needs in the portal. Haven't done a ton other than MJ Morris, quarterback that they got from North Carolina State. Um, so we'll see about all of that. But yeah, I think, he got his wins. They won the bowl game. They beat Auburn. They spanked Auburn this year.
But
Gonna keep the
Billy
fans and
friggin'
donors.
Edwards, who still stinks, by the way. I'll stand by that take I had earlier this
Yeah.
season.
So they get it done. They keep the fans and boosters happy. I'm sure. And they almost had a chance to land a 5-star guy until Colorado came in at the last second there with Jordan Seaton. But that was almost wild. Wild 24 hours, 30 hours for Maryland there, as they were the favorites for a top 10 player nationally. So, but yeah, I think Maryland should be happy. Should be pretty happy.
Yeah, do not question if Mike Locksley is a good coach or not, right? You could question his hiring of Kevin Sumlin and Josh Gaddis, which I believe I mentioned preseason as well, potentially being a problem, which is why I leaned under big time. And the under did cash. I don't regret not taking the under, by the way. I mean, this is a team that could have went over easily. They started 6-0, like you said.
Yeah.
They were moving. Just things happen sometimes, and things derail a little bit. So especially as they got into conference play there, started playing against some really, really talented teams. They uh they played Michigan closer, right? Than I believe just about anyone,
They
right?
played Michigan and Ohio State close, right? Remember at the halftime of that game, they had a real chance to win against Ohio State. Ohio State came up and just blew the doors off them in that second half. And yeah, like you mentioned, I believe it was 31-24, Michigan and Maryland. And obviously it was at Michigan, if I'm not, no, it was at Maryland. I'm sorry. It's at Maryland. But yeah, regardless though, it was pretty damn close game. And I think that's pretty impressive for Mike Locksley to do that against the class of the Big Ten, the two teams everybody kind of looks up to.
Yeah, I think it's ridiculous to think that Michael Locksley is even near the hot seat. He shouldn't be. If he is, then I don't know what that administration is doing,
Well, I
quite
think
frankly.
a lot was made from after starting 5-0, whatever it was, and then losing to Ohio State, and then you went on a little bit of a skid. But hey, you played Ohio State. You finished that 4-game skid with Penn State. Okay, those are not games you're supposed to win, anyways, at Maryland. And then you had a close loss at home to Illinois, which was tough, right? Obviously, Illinois was not as good as we thought they were going to be this year. But losing to Northwestern at the time looked awful. And everyone's like, what are you guys doing? What's happening with Maryland? They're on a 3-game skid, blah, blah. Then they get blown out by Penn State the week after. And it was all doom and gloom. And they finished the season super strong in November, right? They beat Nebraska on the road there. As ugly as it was, they beat them. They played Michigan close. They beat the Rutgers, their quote unquote rival in the Big Ten. And then obviously they stomped Auburn in a good SEC program. So, yeah, I don't think that Northwestern loss looks as bad as it does, back in end of October, like we thought it was. It's a bowl eligible team that you lost to, and a team that beat a pretty good team in the Pac-12.
Yeah, I agree. Let's rip off the Band-Aid. Minnesota, the Gophers. On this show, neither of us took them at 7, over 7, but I definitely slammed them at 6.5. and it still did not cash by 2 games. And there were so many opportunities for them to win ball games. I mean, and there are some casuals out there that think that PJ Fleck is a bum, and I'll let you defend him for a second.
Yeah, I just think people don't understand him. They think he's fake. They think he's a snake oil salesman. Whatever you want to do, who cares? He doesn't care what you think, which is credit to him. Us as Minnesota fans, I think we're frustrated at times. I know after that Northwestern game, I was livid. I was super upset. It was a brutal month of October or September and October until you beat Iowa. And let's be honest here, like if you beat Iowa or Wisconsin, Minnesota fans will forgive you. And no matter what happens,
Immediately.
you beat Iowa or Wisconsin, and then you win your bowl game, which he did, right? Going 5-7, making it because of good academics.
Is he still undefeated at Minnesota bowl games?
Yes, he is. And again, that's what matters at programs like this. You cannot think that it's Ohio State. You cannot think it's even Auburn, right? Schools like that in that high expectations, maybe almost too lofty expectations. Minnesota fans are pretty reasonable and happy with what we take. So yeah, it was a tough year, and I think part of the reasons that happened is depth and the and defense was very, very lacking. Their linebacker core got decimated, and Purdue just embarrassed them, and even Wisconsin too to some extent. Um, and Illinois as well. And but what's new? What's new with Joe Rossi? We had Mariano Marin the year before, and that was terrible. Joe Rossi moves on to Michigan State. Good for him. Gets a promotion there. He was a highly respected college football head coach or defensive coordinator, defensive mind. A guy that's really kind of made up for that talent gap at Minnesota and some of that depth there. It didn't quite happen this year. Their defense got exposed, not his fault. They had to replace some guys, which you mentioned, right? John Michael Schmitz, their center, Terrell Smith, their cornerback, and Mo Ibrahim. And obviously Tanner Morgan as well. So those guys, the running back position battled injuries, the cornerback position battled injuries, and secondary did. And then obviously the O line was good, not great. Yeah, it was tough. I was very excited for this year. I know a lot of fans were. We were happy about Ethan Caligmanis coming in. We thought he'd be the savior. We saw what he did against Wisconsin, and we let that fool us into thinking is this really good quarterback in the Big Ten. Can he change our minds at Rutgers? Maybe, like I talked about earlier, but I don't quite see it. I think they're moving on. Max Brosmer's coming in, a couple of transfers. On the defense side of the ball, should be a much different looking team next year. Daniel Jackson, bright side, he turned into a stud. He's a legit wide receiver one in the Big Ten. A guy that was just about 1,000 yards. He is a weapon, even though everyone knows he's getting the ball. Right? No one else stepped up. Brevin Spanford, we missed on. We thought he'd be really good. He took a step back. Corey Crooms, credit to you for not being on as high on him as everybody else was. Elijah Spencer needed a year to develop and to adjust to Big Ten football. And obviously, Darius Taylor hit, but he was hurt. He played 5 games and he rushed for like 1,000 yards. So that was
Crazy,
pretty
by the
awesome.
way. That's crazy.
It's nuts.
He
And you
rushed
saw the
for a
bowl
thousand
game.
yards. He played in 5 games.
Yeah, it was literally wild. He had multiple 200-yard games, which is just only Minnesota football, right? And you still lose a bunch. But yeah, you beat Iowa, and that's that. You bring in a massive recruiting class. Coy Parrish, Twitter, videos going on Twitter right now of him just getting his crazy alley oop. I mean, the guy's a freak. You saw him win the All American Bowl, getting some good publicity from Minnesota on the recruiting trail. Exciting to see there. You're bringing a guy like Drake Lindsay, a couple other guys we love on the offensive defensive lines, Nathan Roy, Brett Carroll, and obviously Riley Sunram, all guys that were All Americans or on the All American Bowl participants in high school. Yeah, it was tough. I mean, what do you got to say about Minnesota? Like as a non-biased, SEC guy.
I was disappointed for sure. They just found ways to lose games. They got conservative, and Texas A&M was a culprit of that as well. Some other teams were culprits of that. Like there were just times when, you know, I get that field position is a big thing in the Big Ten West, right? And against certain teams, it's okay to run the ball on 3rd and 12, right? But like it, not that it was Kirk Chirac all over again, but it just like felt like the offense didn't take the steps that it needed to take at all. So disappointing for sure. But let's talk about another team that disappointed me. Let's talk about Illinois. Where the heck was John Paddock week 1?
Oh, he's just awesome, isn't he? We
I
love
mean,
John Paddock.
and he's out of eligibility. We never get to see him play football in a college football uniform ever again. How ridiculous is that? He was unbelievable. I'll I'll take the blame. I was way too high on Illinois. I took their over 6.5. All right. That did not hit by any stretch of the imagination. It was pretty close. Right? It's pretty close. But it's also close to getting worse. Like they shouldn't have won that Minnesota game as well.
But it was John
But
Paddock. It was John Paddock that came in there, and he
yeah, it's
went
John.
3 for 3, 85 yards and a touchdown in about 45 seconds to win the
Yeah.
game.
So what was I high on for Illinois? Their D line, right? And it was still really good most of the time. And Johnny Jazer Newton, Jazon Newton was unbelievable. We'll get to talking. We'll talk about him later on when we talk about awards and stuff. But he was unbelievable. But it can't just be him, right? And Keith Richards was okay. Gabe Hawkins was pretty good as well. They're all really good in pass rush for sure. But like their linebackers were not good. So their secondary turned out to be really hard to replace. Aaron Henry, of course, replacing Ryan Walters at defensive coordinator, which I didn't hate that at all, right? Promote internally, let those guys stay in that scheme, but they didn't have the press man bodies that they did last year to really run the defense that Aaron Henry wants. They didn't have it this year. And I was worried about that. And I mentioned that, being worried about that. But I also thought that Luke Altmaier would be pretty good. And he was pretty bad. So definitely big time miss on there. I was right about being worried about the run game, having huge question marks without Chase Brown, losing some guys on the offensive line there. Definitely going to be interesting moving forward. I believe in that program. I mean, they're playing some pretty decent football these days. So Brett Bielema will be fine there. So what you did not take the over. You feel like your assessment of Illinois preseason was pretty accurate, or what were some things that you missed?
Yeah, I questioned the offense a little bit. I did like the Luke Altmaier coming in. I didn't think he was maybe necessarily the problem, but he was not the answer. Obviously, we saw John Paddock do his thing in November. Was just wild to see. In a shootout against Indiana, which we'll get to later on. Yeah, it was a frustrating year because again, this is another year where, first of all, the year prior you should have won the West and you didn't. And then obviously this year where Iowa was just Iowa, right? And Wisconsin was down. Northwestern was better than you thought, even though and whatnot. And obviously Minnesota was down. Nebraska still not great yet. Purdue was down after a coaching change. So like it was to be the Big Ten West was to be had, and nobody else took it. We were looking for obviously you were looking for Illinois to do that, and build on last year's success. But in the end, yeah, you mentioned they lost a ton of talent to the NFL, and they couldn't quite replace it. And that's kind of the reality of most programs in college football. Like you lose major first round guys, major talented players that play a lot and successfully in the NFL in year one. And you feel that. You really feel that. You lose a defensive coordinator to going over to Purdue in the conference in your division. And by the way, Purdue spanked you in September there. So yeah, it's it's the end of September there. So it was tough. I was can't say I was super surprised in terms of I didn't know if they were going to be like league college football playoff contenders, but I also thought they would be better than 5-7, and that's what they ended up as.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on. Yeah, let's I guess pick this thing up. I guess Purdue, their over under was 5.5. I leaned hard under, and you leaned over, so we faded each other a little bit on this. Here's what I said: I was not super high on Hudson Card, and I was not super high on Graham Harrell. By the way, like up until that point, I don't know that he's had real success as a coordinator anywhere. I don't believe that he really has. USC was not particularly amazing. This year, honestly, he was better. I thought the actual strength of Purdue's team offensively was their pass game. It's some way better receivers than I thought they were going to have. I thought that was going to be a problem. It was not. It was a strength of that team. And I also thought that their defensive line was not going to be looking really great. They had a couple pieces, but it wasn't particularly great. They needed some cornerbacks, which was right. They They needed him bad. And I believe I also mentioned that the Big Ten West itself was getting better with Purdue getting worse. I don't know that that take held up. I think it just looked like the Big Ten West, and Purdue was just at the bottom of it, you know? So and of course, mentioned what they lost, a lot of what they made, a lot of what made them so good last year, aka Aiden O'Connell, Charlie Jones, um, oh gosh, the tight end stud, uh,
Peyton Durham.
Hayden Durham. Thanks for the save. So, what about you? Did you took the over? So clearly they must not have met your expectations.
Well, I was just leaning the over. To be
Oh,
honest, I
sorry,
was
you didn't
thinking,
take the over. You leaned over. That's what I meant to say. Sorry.
yeah, but back in the early summer, we talked about first year coaches we thought would struggle, and I just threw out Ryan Walters because I was just in a vacuum. I was like, you know what, boom.
Early,
And
yeah.
I did, and then once by the time we got to late August there, and I really deep dived into Purdue, I just thought that line was so high or so low. I'm sorry, and I just thought, maybe they'd probably make a bowl game more times than not. I was high on Nick Scorton.
Especially with the schedule.
Yeah, exactly. And I was thinking like, yes, you have Virginia Tech, you have Syracuse, which are tough schedules for sure, but
But were
tough,
they back
but,
back
but
in back in September?
exactly.
The Virginia Tech was not to us,
And
and
Syracuse is not really either.
Syracuse
And
maybe.
those were winnable games that I expected them to compete in. And obviously they went 1-1, which is okay, but they just struggled in Big Ten West play. You kind of got blown out by Nebraska. You beat Minnesota and Illinois, but that was really it. Everywhere else you struggled. Northwestern got the best of you. Wisconsin obviously got the best of you. Iowa, you had a chance to win that game. You probably should have. And
Indiana
obviously,
almost beat you.
yeah, you beat Indiana. So I just thought I was thinking a little bit more from them. In hindsight, I probably regret it for sure. And the problem is like it doesn't get much easier, right? I'm looking at the 2024 schedule and it is brutal. It is your out of conference is Notre Dame, right? And Oregon State, right? That's I mean, yes, we'll see what Oregon State looks like, but that's not easy, right? And then obviously in conference, you still have Wisconsin, you still have Illinois, you have Oregon added to your schedule, you have Ohio State, you have Penn State, and then we'll see how Michigan State and Indiana look as first year coaches there. Like that is it's gonna be brutal for Ryan Walters after they're doing some nice things in the portal, but with Purdue, this was a missed opportunity, I guess if you want to call it. It was tough with Jeff Brom leaving and having to replace so much of that roster and that team. So I guess it's kind of not their fault. But at the same time, it's not going to get easier, and you lose a lot of talent in the portal. Nick Scorton down the SEC, Deion Burks down to Oklahoma. You got some guys going elsewhere as well. It's tough, but we'll see if Hudson Card and Ryan Walters can rebound and then obviously, kind of regain some of that Jeff Brom magic.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Wisconsin now. They finished the season 7-6. They're 7-5, lost their bowl game to LSU, who was just a much better team than they were. It's a tough matchup. Here's some things that we said. We both leaned under, I believe.
Yep.
Do you regret not taking the under?
I do a little bit. I think in hindsight, 8.5 was a little bit too high and a little bit too juicy for first year Luke Fickell. Credit to us. I mean, yes, they did disappoint. They did hit their under. So I guess you could say they did, but in our opinion, I don't think it was quite far off from what we actually thought it was going to be. And they battled injuries at the running back and quarterback position. So you can't really fault them for that as much either. But yeah, with everything that went on, I kind of expected their defense to take a step back, right? I did think it would take a year or two to overhaul that roster, right? I talked about Paul Chryst maybe not leaving it in as good of a spot as maybe everyone assumed it was. It's Wisconsin and the Big Ten West are going to have more talent than everybody else. Not necessarily the case this year. I did think changing a scheme is easier said than done. Ask our net down at Mississippi State how that went to change from an air raid to physical running ground and pound and defense kind of team. This was going the opposite, ground and pound, physical and play defense kind of team over to that Phil Longo, Luke Fickell air raid, passing around a little bit more. It was tough,
I
and
guess it's not like
obviously,
an air raid, but it is pass heavy.
yes.
Especially like
Thank you.
that was something that we keyed in on the preseason. It's like, how is that going to work in November when it is an absolute when it's 28 degrees outside, can't feel your fingers. Like it's a different ball game. And there's a reason that the Big Ten West plays the style of football that they do. And it's kind of an anomaly that Ohio State plays the way that they play because, Ohio State can do both. They can get physical on the ground, right? And then they have explosive athletes in the air as well. But that's just the brand of football that you play in the Big Ten West. So it was, you're right. That style change definitely was something that we were both concerned about moving forward into this past season.
Yeah, and with that, like your schedule wise, in terms of games you should have won, maybe you should have lost, right? Indiana beat you, and yes, that was with a backup quarterback that didn't play well, but that was still tough. Northwestern absolutely outplayed you and kind of embarrassed you, and then obviously Nebraska, you beat in overtime, which was a pretty good win for you guys at Wisconsin, and obviously you beat your rival Minnesota pretty handily in Minnesota. That was a totally battered and just shell of a team in Minnesota. So yeah, and you lost to Iowa against a terrible quarterback in Deacon Hill. That game I know frustrated a lot of Wisconsin folks.
Revenge game for Deacon Hill, though.
By the way, yep, exactly, exactly. And obviously Washington State kind of took it to you in September, but that was back when they were playing fantastic lights out football. Can't really blame you for that, for going all the way to the West Coast, and Cam Ward just puts on a show and beats you with some wide receivers there, Josh Kelly and others. Yeah, I thought it was okay. I think the future is brighter than the season was. I think they can actually compete in the new look Big Ten, unfortunately. But yeah, that's where I stand.
We haven't talked about Iowa yet. Well, I played the over. The over is at 8.5 plus money plus 110. I played it. I actually took it earlier in the summer when it was at 7.5. So, little pat on the back there. Yeah, this is a team that 10 games they won in the regular season. That's unbelievable. So, what did what was I so high on in Iowa? Their defense, of course. And if you were to, like, if you're saying that right now, you're like, well, duh, yeah. But like back in the summer, if you remember, Jack Campbell gone, Riley Moss gone, Lucas Van Ness gone. Those are three really good players. Two of them first rounders. Riley Moss was a third rounder, fourth rounder, went to the Broncos. That's a really good squad right there. And you're losing that core of your team, and you're like, oh, how good is this defense going to be? Can they carry this team well, I kind of anticipated the offense getting a little bit better, and it did not. So I anticipated the offense getting a little bit better, and the defense still playing at a high level. Maybe not as high as I thought. That maybe I didn't think they were going to play as high as they did last year, but certainly they did, and they met up those expectations. So talked about Deontay Craig; he's a good ball player. So matching up against Wisconsin very well, that ended up being a good take as well. Said that they didn't need to beat Penn State to reach 9 wins. That was clear. And yeah, it was just good. Value was good in the crossover games because you played Penn State and then you played Rutgers, right? And Rutgers ended up being better than we thought they were going to be. Well, I guess better than I thought they were going to be. You were high on Rutgers, but they ended up taking it to Rutgers. So you were high on Iowa too, but there was a no play. So did you kind of have that uh same view? Were you looking through the same lens as me, but I just kind of took the over, or what were you thinking
Yeah,
preseason?
I got scared off by just all the changes offensively. Now, it ended up not mattering, like you mentioned, their offense was still terrible, but a lot of that was due to injuries, right? Cade McNamara, the tight ends, the running backs, everyone got hurt there. So a lot of it changed, and they kind of just threw Deacon Hill in there, and Caleb Johnson, broke off a score here or there. Cooper DeJean had a nice punt return or whatever it was to set up scores for that Iowa team. They kind of did, and they played very complimentary football, at least on one side of the ball. And we also mentioned Brian Ferentz just being terrible, and that was about right. But everyone knew that. So I don't know. I just think it was scared because of all the changes with Caden McNamara. There was so much excitement. I was wondering if it was a little bit too much and too rich for me. Ended up not being so. They won 10 games in the regular season, even after losing to a pretty bad Minnesota football team in a very controversial fashion. So yeah, I think I don't know if I would have said 10-2, 11-1 ish area, but they played pretty darn good, and that's kind of why I held on. I thought they were the Big Ten West favorites, right? You mentioned how they match up with Wisconsin. I love that take. and everyone else in the Big Ten West, I didn't think was quite enough ready to compete with Iowa. So yeah, it kind of is what it is. I'm a little bit upset I didn't take the over for sure, but I'm not mad about it because I was a little bit skeptical on the offense, and that turned out to be true.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about Nebraska. This will be our last thing that we talk about, and then we'll get into other stuff as well. Nebraska. I think we both had big question marks, right? I think we knew that we were going to see some kind of improvement because Matt Rule, and we thought the staff that he brought in was pretty effective. And preseason, I believe, I specifically talked on there were a lot of freshmen that were going to play for this team. And that's not a formula to win in the Big Ten, but it doesn't mean it's a bad thing, right? Like if you're looking at this class of freshmen that played this past year, if you get some of those guys to stay in that program and win some ball games down the road, I think they can do just that. I think they can win some ball games down the road. I like that a lot. So I leaned under in this one, I believe, but because I said making a bowl game in Matt Rule's first year would be insanely impressive, and he almost did it. He
Hmm.
almost did it. Probably should have beaten Minnesota, for being honest,
Yeah.
and probably should have beaten Iowa, if we're being honest. But who shouldn't have beaten Iowa? You know, this could have been a lot better record than it showed at 5-7. So, I questioned Jeff Sims. I saw you wrote that down. So if you didn't know, CD went back and watched his videos, and he took notes on like everything that we said. And I was looking at his notes, and he said that I questioned Jeff Sims, which sounds about right. I should have definitely questioned Jeff Sims bringing him in, but yeah. What about you? What were your expectations? I believe you leaned under as well, the under 6 wins.
Yeah, I wanted to see some improvement. Like you mentioned, they were going to play a ton of freshmen. It was going to be a total overhaul, culture, staff, style of play, all that good stuff was going to change from Scott Frost to Matt Rule, which it needed to for sure. I think everyone would agree with that. I think Nebraska fans knew there would be growing pains. I do think you kind of were a little bit frustrated in the end result, in just in terms of how it started, right? With probably should have beaten Minnesota, right, on that Thursday night, primetime game there. And then also how it ended. You had a chance. The Big Ten West was in your fingers. You had a chance to go down and play some competitive, serious football games in November, and you lost four straight one possession football games. Brutal, 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 brutal. One of them was overtime. One of them was Iowa, which should not have happened at all, and obviously Maryland, Michigan State to round that off. So, but also it was kind of impressive because you did it in a year where your starting quarterback for most of it completed under 50% of passes. And I guess I should have been more questionable about Jeff Sims. I think I was just excited about him. I didn't think it would be this bad. I think a lot of it that was, a little bit mental, unfortunately, because you don't see a guy who had some success in the ACC just look so, so bad, dropping the ball, turning the ball over just left and right, like it was with Jeff Sims there in September. I didn't want to buy in too early. I wanted they were a team to watch for me, yes, but not quite Big Ten West contenders, and that turned out to be kind of accurate. So yeah, I definitely did lean the under.
All right, all right. Let's talk about Michigan. We already talked a bunch about them. I'll be brief. I didn't take their over, but that was mostly because I already took their national championship ticket. I thought that this was the best team in the country entering into the season. I didn't take the over just because Ohio State and Penn State are really good, and I had plus 1025 national championship ticket waiting on them, and boy did that cash. So that was pretty awesome. Feels good. Feels good. So we nailed everything. I mean, we said that they were going to run the ball well. We said that we're going to play great defense. We said that their offensive line was going to be absolute animals. Turns out their defense was better than we imagined. So that was awesome. What about you?
Yeah,
You took their over, right?
I pounded the over. Yeah, I loved it. I thought super highly of this roster. I said too much talent and depth to slip up against bad teams in the Big Ten. And obviously all you had to do is go 1-1 against Penn State and Ohio State, which they ended up going 2-0 pretty soundly against both those teams. Only really tested, like seriously tested against Bama, and I guess you could call it against Ohio State as well. I thought they'd lean on their defense and their O line, which they did. I wanted to see a little bit more development of JJ, and I thought there would be. I guess I was a little bit wrong on that. You were right to question him. I think that's part of the reason why you kind of talked yourself out of the over. In addition to already having that futures ticket. I said my questions on this roster I thought were pretty spot on. I said their weaknesses were kicker, which I think we saw to be true at times in some big games, and then also sorry, kicker trying to replace Jake Moody, who's obviously a star, Michigan kicker for them. And then also I thought their wide receiver room was good, but wasn't high end elite to separate and make big plays in big games. And I thought that was pretty accurate as well. I love the new secondary, even after losing some guys to the NFL. And I even after losing Mozzie Smith up the middle, I liked Chris Jenkins a lot as well. So I don't think it really messed up either way. Yeah, I thought that was pretty sound analysis from our end. I didn't think they'd quite be this dominant. But at the same time, like I'm not surprised. That roster was loaded up and down. And they were by far the best team. Like, nah, not by far, but they were the best team in college football, and it showed. And I'm happy for them for winning it all. Now they're reaping. Now they have to deal with the consequences of major success with their coach moving on and a lot of players moving on to NFL. And now their roster is going to be, open season for everybody else. So it's a good thing and bad thing for obviously all the reasons I just explained.
Yep, absolutely. Real quickly, most disappointing and then most overachieving team. Let's say, okay, most overachieving Northwestern. Okay, we'll get that out of the way.
Yeah, if I had to pick a team that was not named Northwestern, I guess Rutgers, right? I think that'd probably be, even though I assume I thought
I
big things
agree.
of them this year, but I also think that to win 6, 7 games this year with that bowl game, pretty darn impressive, right? And maybe I guess you could throw Iowa on there as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say those are
Because
my three. Those are my three.
yeah,
Most over or most disappointing.
right off the bat, Illinois
Illinois.
probably one of them.
Illinois.
Yeah, Minnesota. I think both you and I were higher on them, and we probably should have been. Would you throw Penn State in that category as a disappointing team?
No, no. You won 10 games.
I,
Relax. Cash are over. I
that's
would
what I'm
put a
saying.
lot of national heads had. Well, I mean, Wisconsin was voted to win the Big Ten West, I believe, preseason. So I would say winning 7 games and not even coming close to winning the Big Ten West, that I think would be underachieving for sure. So in my list, it's they're all in the Big Ten West. It's Wisconsin, Illinois, Minnesota.
Yeah. Yep, that's true.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Did you have a favorite Big Ten game to watch?
I'll let you go. I'll let you go first on this one.
Yeah, you will. Give me Illinois versus Indiana, the absolute border rivalry. That game was an absolute showdown between none other than John Paddock and Brennan Sorsby. Elite game. Isaiah Williams went for like God knows how many yards. That game was awesome. So that was probably my favorite Big Ten game to watch. Of course, all eyes were on the Ohio State Michigan game. Oh well. That was a really good game. But I liked Indiana, Illinois. Come on. What about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna call me biased, but I thought that Minnesota Iowa game was just super, super awesome for a lot of
Might
reasons. It had
might be a little
everything you love.
biased.
It had everything you love in a Big Ten West game, right? You had low scoring, crazy wins, right? You had PJ Fleck calling timeouts in the first quarter to then run the ball on third down and kick a field goal before the quarter switched because the wind was so bad. And Minnesota wins without scoring a touchdown. They had the crazy Cooper DeJean, fair catch, not fair catch signal. And obviously that took off a game-winning, basically punt return for a touchdown. Deacon Hill was just about as bad as you could be. And yeah, and obviously the storyline with Minnesota and PJ Fleck finally beating Iowa. They played for one of the best trophies in college football, the Floyd of Rosedale. That's finally back in Minneapolis. Which is, obviously exciting for that city and that fan base as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's move on to awards. So we had like our conference winners, conference dark horses, right? Big Ten player of the year, offense player of the year, defense player of the year, newcomer of the year, coach of the year. Seed and I both had JJ McCarthy for Big Ten player of the year. Now the Big Ten doesn't actually nominate anyone for that. So, but I will say, not that JJ McCarthy should have won it, but don't you think voters would have voted the quarterback of the best team in the Big Ten? I think that's pretty close. Not where my vote would have gone to. Not where my vote would have gone to. I think my Big Ten Player of the Year would have. It's hard to say because like it might have been Johnny Newton, man. It just might have been Johnny Newton. He was so good. He was so friggin' good, man. So good. Um, but yeah, and then offensive player of the year, we both said Marvin Harrison Jr. and he ended up winning that award, so that was awesome. Snaps for us, good prediction, even though that was like the most chalk prediction of all time. Defensive player of the year, we also both said Johnny Newton. He ended up winning the award postseason. How about that? Just like that, I mean, basically 3 for 3. Big Ten newcomer of the year. This is where we got off track a little bit. You selected Dante Cephas. He's transferring from Kent State. Penn State is where he ended up going to. Did not work out there. On the other hand, I had Luke Allmeyer. And you know what? Those first couple games, he looked like the best quarterback in the Big Ten
Big Ten West.
West. Maybe Big Ten. I don't know. Kyle
JJ
McCord didn't
looked
look
pretty
very
good.
impressive. You're right. JJ did look good. But in terms of newcomers, he
That you
looked
felt
like
good.
I felt good those first couple weeks, but then he just stunk. And John Paddock was just a legend. Big Ten Coach of the Year, you had Kirk Ferentz, and he probably would be in any other year that Northwestern didn't have their thing. I had Jim Harbaugh, who like, you know, this of course was before all this stuff came out about, Connor Stallions. So let's give me a little bit of credit here. Like they won the national championship, they won the Big Ten. We both selected Michigan to win the conference, and both of our dark horses were Iowa. So we basically called the Big Ten championship game. I mean, I think we kind of nailed our Big Ten analysis this year, and I'm glad to have watched Big Ten football this year because we'll be seeing a different Big Ten next year.
Yeah. I mean, we did pretty darn good as good of as you could on those awards. I mean, it's hard to predict them. Obviously, we went chalk with a couple of them, and it hit. The newcomer of the year, I do regret taking Cephas. I'm sure you regret taking Altmaier. Dylan Thieneman, the Purdue true freshman safety, ended up winning that, deservingly so. He was a guy I was super high on in recruiting. Back in his senior year, his tape was incredible, and he's had success. His brothers have played at Purdue as well. But yeah, I mean, I went 3-0 in my over/under win totals, and you went 3-2. I mean, that's both in the green there, and we hit the winner, and we hit the dark horse basically. So yeah, it's
And a national championship ticket.
a pretty good day all around at the office for us in a year where you had a lot of things going on with some coaching changes in the Big Ten West. You had, Michigan and Ohio State battling.
Mid-season. Well,
Yeah.
that was actually more the East. Mid-season was Michigan State, but yeah, some coaching changes early on. I thought we did awesome.